Prometheus gave the human being the gift of fire, but because of doing so, it was punished by the gods, by Zeus, and was essentially tied up. And then a bird will come and feed on his liver every single day for eternity. So in the sense, he did a good thing, but sort of he was punished for it. And you can look at this myth from two perspectives. One is the AI industry itself, in the sense that companies like Alphabet created transformer models and sort of pioneered the LLM and generative AI solutions. And now they are being punished for it because people are doing a lot of their searches and queries and information gathering through Gen AI tools, not necessarily as much through browsers. And then the second lens you can look at this myth is from the perspective of investment management firm, in the sense that analysts certainly benefit from using Gen AI tools in terms of automating some of the more repetitive activities or even core activities within their investment process. But at the same time, by embracing more of such technologies, they're working themselves out of a job. So I think in that sense, if you want to speculate on what's coming in the buy side, I think what will happen on the buy side is what happened in the sell side in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, if you look at the top 10 bulge bracket banks, each had maybe more than 200 or sometimes 300 analysts covering different sectors. Now they all combined have around 300 analysts. And I think what may happen on the buy side in the next 20 years might not be quite as dramatic, but perhaps we will see a situation where the total number of analysts covering a larger pool of capital 20 years from now would be perhaps 2/3 or half of what it is today. So in that regards, you can clearly see the Prometheus parallels here.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on the show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. You know how researching a company can take forever, digging through filings, transcripts, and reports trying to make sense of it all? That's where Tenzing Memo comes in. It's an AI-powered market intelligence platform that helps you research public companies in minutes instead of days. Created by stock analysts for stock analysts, people who love the treasure hunt of investing. I spent over 20 years investing professionally, and when I started using Memo, it immediately became part of my process. It surfaced new ideas, helped me spot insights on stocks I held for years, and connected data points I'd completely missed. It's fast, intuitive, and gives you a research superpower. Tenzing sponsored this episode to help us make Talking Billions better for you. Use code BILLIONS at sign up for an extended trial and 10% off. Check out Tenzing Memo today. My guest today is Ehsan Ehsani, Executive Director at Crescendo Partners and Adjunct Assistant Professor at Columbia Business School. With a unique journey from a chemical engineer in Iran to an academic and an investment professional in New York City, Ehsan bridges the worlds of technology, quantitative analysis, and traditional value investing. He's the author of Finding Value in Numbers and How Not to Be Replaced by a Spreadsheet That Talks, which explores how fundamental investors can harness generative AI without being displaced by it. As the organizer of Columbia's 2025 Generative AI in Investment Management Conference, Ehsan stands at the intersection of timeless investment principles and cutting-edge technology. He joins us as we explore how to build wealth in an era where the tools are smarter than ever, but human judgment remains irreplaceable. Ehsan, so nice to see you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking and delighted to be here.
I'm so excited. I told you that probably more than half of the questions I'm getting from the audience over email are about AI. And it's not questions about how to invest in AI, but how to embrace it, especially people that invest their own money, people that are professional investors. They're all curious. It's such a new phenomenon. You wrote a book about it, which I couldn't put down, and I have a million questions about it. So I'll ask you all of them today. But I want to start from the beginning. I'm very curious. I know a little bit. I'd love to know more. Tell me about your childhood upbringing, the early days, and how do you think that time shaped you?
I think if I want to summarize, this whole journey in a couple of minutes, I would start by giving some background in terms of where I grew up. I was born in Iran, in the western part of the country. In terms of climate, Iran is very similar to the US in the sense that if you go south, it's really hot. If you go north, there's a lot of forests and things like that. And I was born in the western part, where it's kind of like Colorado, climate-wise. I was born in a town which was 14,000 feet above sea level. And my father was working in banking sector, and my mother was an art teacher. And that's basically the setting for my upbringing. My parents, in similar fashion to households in countries like China and India, were very strict, emphasizing the value of studying for their children. So I was not an exception. There was a tremendous emphasis on hard technical skills or pursuing medical profession. I pursued the former, attended the National University entry exam when I was 18 years old, and ended up as an undergrad student pursuing chemical engineering in the capital.
What brought you to New York?
So the journey to New York has been kind of like a roller coaster, in the sense that when I was an undergrad student, I took an elective management course, fell in love with the topic. In parallel, I had come to realization that I was not going to be a very good chemical engineer, and perhaps my talent and interest lied elsewhere, in this case, management, process improvement, and things of that sort. So I got a job after doing an internship in a chemical company, but not as chemical engineer, but doing management analyst work. And I started reading a book while I was there about product development, and I fell in love with the topic of innovation and product modularization and adjacent areas. I did some research. I realized that there is this university in Sweden that is on the cutting edge of the subject. I applied to that university, got admitted, got a master's degree there, got another master's degree in a dual program at MIT and a center in Spain. did management consulting work afterwards in Europe and 10 plus other countries. And then one of the projects that I was engaged with had a US component. So they didn't have anybody at the time to do it. And they asked me if I was willing to relocate. And that's how I relocated to New York in the late 2000s.
I want to ask you about Prometheus, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, remind us of the myth. But stealing fire from the gods and facing eternal punishment, that's what I remember from school. And you're telling us that AI in the investment management world, we might be actually playing with fire here. It might be helping us, but maybe it will get us in some trouble. Can you talk about that myth and how we can be playing with fire here?
Sure. I mean, the myth is well known. Prometheus gave the human being the gift of fire, but because of doing so, it was punished by the gods, by Zeus, and was essentially tied up. And then a bird will come and feed on his liver every single day for eternity. So in the sense, he did a good thing, but he was punished for it. And you can look at this myth from two perspectives. One is the AI industry itself, in the sense that companies like Alphabet created transformer models and sort of pioneered the LLM and generative AI solutions, and now they are being punished for it because people are doing a lot of their searches and queries and information gathering through Gen AI tools, not necessarily as much through browsers. And then the second lens you can look at this myth is from the perspective of investment management firm, in the sense that the analysts certainly benefit from using Gen AI tools in terms of automating some of the more repetitive activities or even core activities within their investment process. But at the same time, by embracing more of such technologies, they're working themselves out of a job. So I think in that sense, if you want to speculate on what's coming in the buy side, I think what will happen on the buy side is what happened in the sell side in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, if you look at the top 10 bulge bracket banks, each had maybe more than 200 or sometimes 300 analysts covering different sectors. Now they all combined have around 300 analysts. And I think what may happen on the buy side in the next 20 years might not be quite as dramatic, but perhaps we will see a situation where the total number of analysts covering a larger pool of capital 20 years from now would be perhaps 2/3 or half of what it is today. So in that regards, you can clearly see the Prometheus parallels here.
With fire, there's so many aspects of the AI revolution that are different, to me at least, than the other technological changes we've seen. On one hand, you have those companies, incumbents that are developing new AI tools, but at the same time, they're recording some massive layoffs already because they're using those AI tools within the companies, which is counterintuitive. I understand it, but at the same time, it's counterintuitive because if you have some new uses, new purposes, you would think they're hiring a lot of new talent to build it out. But as they're growing, they're actually firing people, which worries me, but we'll come back to it. Second thing that I could really relate to, I've been investing for 20 years. I manage money for families, long-term patient capital. I see myself as an analyst, but a portfolio manager that builds portfolios these days. But there was a day when I was Oscar. Oscar is a character from your book. I was a junior analyst that would pull up the numbers, read the filings, put them in a spreadsheet, write up summaries, listen to earnings calls, and show to the senior portfolio managers what happened in the quarter and explain and give some backdrop and update the model. And a lot of manual labor. It was on the computer, but it feels medieval when I talk about it now. Now you're teaching at Columbia. You have a whole army of 20-year-olds wanting to do what I did, or we both probably did 20 years ago. they might not be in a position to do it. What do you tell them, and how do they have to embrace this new reality that there are tools that replace that elementary entry-level work that all of us had to do to even learn the profession? Can we skip that step? I think that's an additional question I have. Can we skip that step in our education?
The step of doing
the manual labor. It's almost like learning how to use a paper map before trusting, Google Maps or Apple Maps. I think that's the big question.
Yeah, I personally think we shouldn't step that part, and I explain to you in a minute why. But related to your earlier question of what I tell the students, first of all, I talk about this story in the book that you also highlighted, this gentleman with the name of Oscar who works at a very small fund, and his job is, for the most part, reading stuff and summarizing them in the bullet form or tabular format to be used in investment memos and things of that nature. And as we all know, generative AI tools do that sort of thing pretty well, and very soon he ends up being out of work. And I think that threat is real. So essentially, we have two options. The threat of AI in respect to job security is real. We can do nothing about it and get ourselves into serious trouble, or we can at least embrace it and be analysts with AI who are running faster than the other ones when faced with the threat of a bear. So I think that's the answer. And I think in terms of a skill set, what I tell the students is that in the past, the ideal profile for analysts or professionals was to have a T-shaped skill set profile, in the sense that you know a lot about a broad range of topics and top issues, and then you're specialized in one area. I think now in this new world, you need to have a pie-shaped skill set profile, in the sense that you need to know a lot about different topics. You need to know about finance in a specialized way, but you also need to know a lot about AI and analytics, because analysts of the future, investors of the future, even if they work in fundamental or value-oriented funds, certainly needs those type of skill sets. Now, going back to your second question, where you asked about whether we can skip that or not, I think we can certainly skip it, but it might not be a good idea. So, for example, when I was an undergrad, I had a course in chemical engineering where we had to calculate and estimate the height of a distillation tower in an oil refinery. And we did that by using pen and paper. Fast forward 10 years, I was working with some of the engineers in a Fortune 500 oil company. And I asked them, do you remember those curves and how we used to calculate the height of the distillation tower? And none of them knew what I was talking about. And they asked me, what are you talking about? I said, so-and-so elements. And they said, oh, we just type a number in the computer and we get the estimation. So in a sort of existential scenario, in a scenario in which you don't have such tools at your disposal, you'll be helpless. And I sort of concerned that if we can certainly skip it, but if we skip that step, maybe 10, 15 years from now, our analysts will be dumber compared to our analysts today, and that's certainly not a good thing.
I have so many thoughts. I'm thinking how, if I was 20 all over again, I would have to grow up faster. I think that's kind of the impression I have. You have only that much time to learn to pull the numbers, put them in the spreadsheet and summarize them, if that's what you want to do. I think it's still helpful, and I think you would agree with me. I think it's still helpful to know how the number came about and why it's helpful, because the number or the statement will be sometimes wrong. It will be. I think that's the nature of a lot of data. And having the ability to tell that this is off, it comes from practice of seeing many filings, many businesses, and just seeing like this makes no sense. And actually knowing your businesses, even I will talk more about it, what I use, but the general tools that are out there, whenever I want to look up something quickly, because I know the businesses, I know that this is not an accurate piece of information, right? So it's something that it's such a second nature to me that I can't tell that I have it. I have a friend who finds mistakes in official filings. He calls companies. He says your footnotes are
Right.
off. He's much better at that than I will ever be. But I admire that he calls public companies and tells them where their footnotes are off.
Yeah, even now, a lot of times when I want to do deep research on a name, I build the model manually myself because I can certainly download financial statements or even completely turnkey models from a number of different tools available. But once you build the model and you enter the numbers manually, at the end of that process, you know the business. So the value of going through those steps in the situation when it's necessary is not generally building a DCF, but getting a deeper understanding of how this business operates and how and where the numbers came about.
I'm curious about this idea of redefining value. I think the investment profession is here to stay. We will just rethink how we provide value and how, when I think of us, I mean the firms and individuals within the firms. I started 20 years ago, a wonderful New York firm with long traditions, but everything was in-house. We even had a lady that would come in on weekends and vote proxies because all the proxies come at the same time. And she would vote proxies, and I would see her. Sometimes I would stop by on Saturday, and she would be there going because you had to mail them. I'm dating myself here. You had to mail them. So she was doing it, and now you can do it yourself. You can do vote online.
Exactly.
There are tools that vote for you. Although I personally think that you should vote your proxies. At least read what you're voting. Anyways, that's my belief. One little example. I'm thinking about value added going forward. So certain processes can be automated. AI will make them easier. How do you think about your day-to-day work at the firm where you work and professionally speaking, changing in terms of how you allocate your time and effort and skills?
So the way I conceptualize this is as follows. I think that if you want to win in the market, you need to have a framework. And a good framework is composed of two components, the right mindset and the right process. So I think the way AI impacts our profession, at least in the early years, is through impacting the process. And if we are successful in generating alpha or better returns compared to our index, is most likely from the process perspective is because our process has less flaws, or we do something which is different than others that gives us edge. So therefore, when it comes to adoption of AI, the way I think about usage is we need to be very purposeful in terms of how we use generative AI technologies. We need to re-examine different steps of our process, figure out what are the areas that really differentiate and gives us edge. We need to keep those. And then there are areas which are repetitive, perhaps low-hanging fruit in terms of efficiency gain. We can automate those using AI. Then that's one way I look at it. That's essentially emulating what we're doing today using AI, which is good, but it's not sufficient. Because if we do some activities or stuff which are wrong, if we emulate the whole thing using AI, we're essentially going to make those mistakes faster and faster. So we have essentially failure on a steroid. After maturity in the first stage of adoption, I think the better approach would be to rethink what are and sort of brainstorm what are the things that we can't possibly do today the way we're operating, and if we could use AI, we could do those, and then incorporate those in the process. So I think that would be hugely game changing in terms of additional abilities that it provides to us. Example of that would be if right now we're doing analysis on one name, let's say a company, and in the restaurant industry, we just look at this stock and maybe a couple of its competitors. Now with the use of AI, maybe we can include broader industry scanning or some pattern recognition stuff and incorporate those in our process, or do some case studies through data crunching and see where the potential inflection points are. Those are the things that might not have been necessarily possible in the time constraints and resource constraints that the small fund has, but AI allows us to accomplish those.
I have so many thoughts. Well, I'll share with you that I've always embraced new things. When I started, I was the one that would bring new software to the firm where I was. Some of the older members of the team would be resistant, and they'd talk to me about legal pads and pencils and how they could do what I'm trying to do with much less before. I explained to them that the competition is using software and they are processing more information, looking at more companies, and just doing more in-depth work because they have computers, right? So I thought I was the cutting edge of whatever was happening. And today, the same way, I'm trying a lot of different tools. I've actually, and I mentioned to you that I've been using Tenzing Memo for a while, and they approached me to sponsor this podcast. So they're a sponsor of this episode, and there are details in the notes for anybody interesting. But for me, Tenzing has become a crucial tool in my process because it allows me to go through a lot of, on one hand, filings and transcripts of any public information, but I know what goes in, which is important to me. So there's less of a chance for hallucination, and they're ready to use questions for me to go through. And then I can interact almost as if I had this superhuman analyst with that content and ask, 5 years ago, they did this and that. Can you go back and look up what they said about it? And if they mentioned it since. If I usually have those questions on Friday at 5 p.m. I don't know why. I think this is...
Well, it happens to all of us.
Right? So an analyst would probably lose their mind if I asked them at 5 o'clock on a Friday. But Tenzing just answers my questions and I can find an input. It has helped me with existing holdings and it has discovered some new names for me that I haven't looked at in a while. So I'll mention it for the benefit here. I want to ask you something that really made an impression on me when I was learning to invest, and it was the people. So I got to work with people that were much older than me. I was 24 when I started, but I worked with people in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 80s. I also worked with people that they had their mentors that remembered the Great Depression. So when they started, it was the echo of a whole different era. And to me, it was just fascinating to learn. And every single generation would tell me that the best times are behind us. Very often. And I would disagree. So I'm curious, when you are taking on those two hats, you're a professional investor, but you're also a teacher. You stand in front of students. Do you tell them that the best times are behind us, or do you tell them get excited about what's ahead? How do you think about it?
No, I agree with you that if you can innovate and adapt yourself to the changing times, you can always find bright spots that provide really rewarding outcome for you professionally and also from job satisfaction perspective. So I think brighter days are behind us if we don't change our mentality and continue doing work or focus on a skill set that worked maybe 20 years ago but might not be as relevant now. So I think the key point I want to drive home here is that we need to be vigilant and adapt ourselves to the changing time and try to look at where the bright areas are, growth areas are, position ourselves in those areas.
I'm personally very optimistic and very excited. I feel like the more tools we have, the more people are looking at the actual results, I think the whole mechanism of price discovery in the market can work better. I think the more knowledgeable, thoughtful participants we have, I wouldn't see everybody as a competition. I would see it as just a richer market experience, because if we're all buying the same stocks and doing the same things, I think there's some danger in it. And I don't want to point any fingers, but I think that's a dangerous place to be. But having your own opinion after your own research. But related to that, when we interact with AI, there's a certain element that you bring up in your writing, the confirmation bias amplifier, right? So it's almost like talking to an analyst that is working towards the bonus at the end of the year, and they'll tell you exactly what you want to hear, but it's even amplified. How do we interact with it so we don't get caught in that confirmation bias loop?
Yeah, I think we really need to sort of fine tune and work on our prompting strategy. Because the funny example that I talk about in the book is that if we ask an AI tool, is Elon Musk doing a great job? And then the Gen AI tool will tell you, of course, he's doing an amazing job. And he's a combination of Dalai Lama and Batman. So instead, we sort of, whenever we interact with the system, we need to be aware of the fact that for the most part, they are sort of audience pleasers and provide this confirmation. So we need to act as devil advocate sometimes when we interact with them, trying to get information. And sometimes in parallel, we should change the way we ask questions. So for example, in my case, if I want to give a real example, for one of the names that we were holding a while ago, I asked initially an AI tool, are there any major negative things happening in the marketplace which might affect stock XYZ? And the answer was no. But later on, we figured out that there were a lot of the small things on the Salesforce side, on the competitive side, on the regulation front, which were all small. They were faint signals, but combined together, they would pose serious threat. But the way we ask the question from Gen AI, we say, is there any major threat going on? No, there is not a major threat happening or going on, but there are a lot of small things combined, having a major impact. So if we had rephrased the question or sort of asked for the latter, we would have escaped from being trapped in confirmation bias issues.
I think we are all going on this loop here of learning to ask better questions, because I think in general, and not just in investment pursuits, I think AI is teaching us to ask better questions, because we can get a lot more if we phrase the question better. And I think it's a whole topic for me, how education could work instead of memorizing facts.
Right.
Learning to learn and learning to think, because the tools will change, the environment will change. And I think it's even more urgent now than ever before. So learning to ask better questions, better quality questions, which is hopefully what I'm trying to do on this podcast, by the way.
Well, you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. But you pointed out something that really struck a chord with me, and I don't want to miss it. It's about the subtle things. I agree that the model, the AI, can produce a write-up of a stock, 100 pages, but I think you and I would agree then the conviction is built on a couple of very subtle elements, why this business is different, why this business will make a difference, and on and on and on. But I think I call it zooming out to zoom in. So it allows me to see a lot, but then I go in and I even pull up an earnings transcript or a piece of information or one page from the filings to go in and see something. what did they exactly say about this product, one aspect. And that gives me the additional conviction because for me, investing is, yes, you're buying the right things at the right price, but a lot of it is about, are you going to hold it long enough for it to matter? And whatever gives you the conviction to do it, I think that's the high value added to me. You talk about the storytelling, that finance is storytelling with numbers. And I really like that because, you show me the numbers and until you tell me the story, I don't know what I'm looking at, right? Can you talk about how AI plays a role in crafting what people call the investment thesis, which is like giving the numbers a heartbeat and a life and a story?
Yeah, sure. So, one way we can do this is, I think at the end of the day, if we want our narrative or a story to be differentiated, we need to develop it ourselves. So that's an area I wouldn't necessarily use AI for. I might use AI suggestions, but I try to come up with the narrative myself. But what AI, in my perspective, can be useful is to act as a devil's advocate, to test different scenarios, extreme scenarios, to look at and make sure that other players in the industry have been behaving or acting the way we have portrayed in our narrative, things of that nature. If we look at it that way, Gen AI will allow us to shorten the cycle of idea to narrative or idea to thesis tremendously, and we can use that extra time to look at more names in the universe of opportunities that we have in front of us. And the more names we can look at, then the likelihood of us landing on a multi-bagger or a success story would be higher. So that's one way I look at it.
No, it's very helpful. And to know when the human work begins and when AI ends, I think that's very helpful too. I want to ask you about the elephant in the room, the hallucination problem. And I was traveling a few months ago. I'm standing in front of this beautiful building and I was very curious. I'm always curious about old buildings. I work with families that have had wealth over many generations. So when I see a beautiful building, I know there's a story. I know there's a family. And so I'm looking it up. I'm using one of the chat options out there, and I'm getting the answer about the lady that owned the building, and it was absolutely wrong. The husband, she didn't have kids. It was in the notes that she had kids. Everything was wrong about it. And then I found out a day later, reading somewhere else, what the true story was. But such an innocent thing, it doesn't really matter because there's no. But there are moments where AI is just so confident inventing data out of nowhere, which is a weak spot. That's why I think for me it's very important to know what kind of data you put in before you start asking questions. But anyways, exactly. How do you think about it? Hallucinations are a dangerous territory.
Yeah, I think if I'm asked, should we use an AI tool in our investment process, I always tell the audience, you should use a range of different tools, not just one tool. It's almost like using a software in a company. You don't have a software. You have software for accounting, you have software for inventory management, and so on and so forth. And Gen AI investment management is the same. Mm-hmm. So why did I bring this up? It's because you need to use general purpose you should use general purpose tools like ChatGPT, Claude, and so on and so forth. But you should also use finance-specific tools like Tenzing and so on. The reason is because the likelihood of hallucination on general purpose tools is much higher. So you shouldn't use them for everything. They're cheaper to summarize information which are not critical, but they make a lot of mistakes. So that's one way I look at mitigating the risk of hallucination. One of my research partners recently ran experiment. In this case, they looked at American Eagle Outfitter, American retailer essentially, and they asked ChatGPT 5 to look at the latest conference call transcript and provide the major quotes by the CEO. ChatGPT 5 offered 6 quotes after thinking for 3.4 seconds, and all 6 of them were wrong. None of them were sentences said by the CEO. Subsequently, they asked ChatGPT 5 to summarize the future-looking statements. It's a very well-known fact that the general-purpose Gen AI tools, especially, they struggle with forward-looking statements mentioned in present tense. So if the CEO says, we will make 5% more investment in R&D next year, ChatGPT picks it up. If CEO says, we're making 5% more investment in R&D next quarter, ChatGPT most likely misses it because it's mentioned in present tense. So that's another issue associated with general purpose AI tools. And then last but not least, you might say, well, whatever you talked about so far relates to the nuances of the language, which is subjective. In theory, numbers, which are objective, should be immune from this. Well, say in the same experiment, we asked ChatGPT 5 to give us the number of stores in the last 6 quarters, and it got 50% of them wrong. So one of them is, look at the criticality of information and task in hand. And if it's non-critical and low value, go for generic tools like ChatGPT because they're much cheaper and they do a relatively good job. And then if they're more critical, use more robust finance-specific tools. And I think finance-specific tools, for the most part, have this in the sense that when you have a query or you ask them to generate a report, they provide you with a citation of where the data came from. If we think that the data is critical, we should always verify where it came from. And I think that's a good practice to have. It's a little bit time consuming, but for now, until we gain enough trust in a specific solution, we have no choice but to do that.
I think it's very helpful and goes back to what we spoke about before. I mean, if you had experience looking at the original documents most of your career, then this is second nature. And I hope that young analysts do spend some time looking at original documents before trusting whatever tool tells them the truth is.
Exactly.
Funny. At first it's funny, then I think it's dangerous. I think that's how I look at it. Anyways, food for thought. I want to ask you about the speed paradox. You mentioned how a 2-person shop can cover as many names as maybe 12 analysts used to handle. And if everyone has the same access, the same speed, the same research capacity, you would think it democratizes access, makes the investment profession more competitive, right? You don't need to have a multi-million-dollar budget to have all those analysts on the payroll. Where does the advantage come from in the future? How do you think about it?
So I think we can look at it from two angles. One is very large funds versus small funds. And then the second angle we can look at this is through the lens of having a right framework or process. So I think if you look at it from process perspective, funds out there, some of them have a not necessarily good process, some of them have an okay process, and some of them have a great process. And when I say they have a great process, what that means is that they have less flaws or in their activities that they do when they research a name, come up with an idea, or they make less mistake. So if Gen AI automates the investment process, at least in the initial phases of adoption, what will happen is that the ones that have a better process will get ahead much more than others. And the ones that have not necessarily as good of a process, to use the phrase I used earlier, they will fail in a story. They make even more mistake, more colossal mistake. So if the performance of the funds is almost like a bell curve, in the future, you will still have a bell curve. There are still people who are doing average. There are people who are doing not as good, and there are people who are doing great. But this bell curve will now have fat tails, meaning you see a bifurcation of performance. The ones that are that have a better process, better mindset, doing much, much better, and the ones that didn't have a good process, they do much worse than before and eventually vanish. So that's one way I think it will impact the marketplace from the perspective of fund management. The second way I think it impacts the industry is from the size of the firm. It is true. I certainly believe that Gen AI will allow a very small shop to punch above its weight and operate at a similar scale that, let's say, a fund with a dozen employees operates. But there is a matter of a scale, because once you sort of realize the benefits from low-hanging fruits, then in order to break the plateau and go to the next stage of performance, you need a scale. And if you're a very large fund with multi-billion-dollar AUM, you can certainly afford doing the necessary investment. And if you're a smaller one, you can't. So I think, again, another bifurcation will happen is that, yes, everybody will do better, but then the ones which are bigger will become even bigger, and the ones which are smaller not necessarily go away, but they sort of be in a stagnant situation.
It's a really interesting point. When I think of a smaller firm, and I've had experience with larger but not very big firms, and then smaller and smaller, and found independence running my own practice the last few years, I realized that the bigger the firm, the harder it is to roll out any new tools in an even way. And there will be folks that will accept it right away. There will be the ones doing it the old way. And then you realize that there are 4 different types of old way of doing things. It's the old model, or it's the old spreadsheet, or it's the old checklist, or whatever it is. So I think smaller firms can adapt and move quickly. I think the larger firms will probably catch up and do more. And I'm also, and I don't have the answer yet, the cost, because so far with a lot of those tools that are relatively affordable, with obviously some of very specialized tools being well priced, but it's been very accessible to the public to use those tools and learn how to use them. So I think it can be very democratized. I'm thinking of, let's call out Bloomberg terminals, very expensive tool for a lot of firms. And I remember how even larger firms would decide who can have a terminal, who cannot have a terminal, right?
Right.
So I think here we're, democratizing access and learning to interact with it and experiment and make it better. I want to point out 2 things that really struck a chord with me as I was, writing about AI a little bit myself. I wrote an essay, my observation, and I agree with you. There are a few things that caught my eye that I want to bring up here. I met quite a few investors that love turning rocks. And I think AI is a bit of a trap because there's no end to turning rocks. And with some of those tools that actually suggest the next question, there's really no end to how many questions you can ask. You're a superhuman analyst. And at some point you have to say, Ehsan, I know enough. I don't know everything, but I know enough to start a position. And I think that's going to be a hurdle for those that love turning rocks. I love turning rocks, but I have a limit of rocks. At some point I want to act on it. And the second thing I want to point out, and I'm curious, related to that, AI can help us produce a 100-page report. And we know those very famous investors that give us those 100-page PowerPoints that tell us why this stock is cheap. And then we have others that tell us you just need a one page. And some talk about the thin folder idea. I like the thin folder idea. And I'd rather have investments that can fit in a thin folder. I think as much as you can find a lot of supporting data that AI will find for you and maybe organize for you, at the end of the day, let's not forget that if you can't defend your investment case with a half a page, to me, it's a problem, and I think it can be dangerous. That's me. I mean, I know people that love very complicated investment cases. I have respect for them, but that's for me. Thin folder investing. Anyways, do you think of this trap of turning rocks, and how do you think about the thin folder?
I agree with both. I think there is value in both of them. And one way we can accommodate this while using AI is that we can use AI in such scenarios for grilling the idea that we came up with through turning rocks, and try to sort of stress test the thin folder that we have built. Because even if we don't have a 100-page report, we have a one-page report, if we take that idea to a pitch event or share it with the investing committee and so on, we will be bombarded with a lot of different questions. And one way AI can help with that is sort of with stress testing it and coming up with the supporting information that we might need to provide if we ask a question about it.
We have all those tools. I wrote a piece about it that beyond all those tools, it takes time for a good investment to work out, and temperament is important, and you share it too. Can you explain why beyond, and I think Ben Graham had this quote that I have to look up, I don't remember, but he said how everything around us changes, new tools, new way of trading, and he was talking about a whole different level of innovation that we're experiencing. But it's the human emotional makeup, the temperament that makes all the difference at the end of the day. Yes. Can you talk about it?
Yes, I think I see no contradiction here. I believe I may be paraphrasing a little bit where about this quote by Charlie Munger when he was saying, great investing is about finding a wonderful business and then sit on your ass. And I certainly agree with that, but I see no contradiction with AI in that regard, in the sense that one way we can look at it is the investment process from idea to the time where we pull the trigger. In that regard, AI can help us look at more angles, gather more information, and make a better and more informed decision. But if we have a lot of conviction in the name, then after that, there is no need to worry or take action. We can certainly have patience, or as Charlie Munger says, sit on our butt and, watch the beauty of compounding in action.
It's no recommendation, but speaking of Buffett and Munger, I go to Omaha every year. I imagine that you've been. And in the morning, everybody's getting ready. It's an experience. It's hard to explain, but it's an experience. And every year I run into folks that have owned Berkshire shares. Again, no recommendation, do your own research, whoever's listening. And usually it's a couple. And usually their professions have nothing to do with investing. And they have the same story that I've heard more times than I'm willing to admit. And it rhymes. They say they looked at Buffett, they saw somebody they trust. He knew what he was doing. They understood the principles behind it, and they bought the shares and they went on about their life, whether they're teaching or working in farming or engineering or anything else that they're doing with their life, and they kept the shares. And then you have people that come to Omaha that know Berkshire inside out. They know the names of all the managers of different businesses. They can give you metrics and store counts and traffic and all those. And I don't know if they've held the shares long enough. But anyways, you have the two extremes, right? And I imagine you add AI to it and there's absolutely no limit to how much you can know about the company. Bottom line is, if you haven't held the shares long enough, none of it matters. So whatever you need to get the conviction, right?
Exactly. I mean, two things. One is, there was a professor at Columbia who I had the privilege of serving. I had the privilege of serving as his assistant. His name was Tom Triforus, very seasoned investment, very respectable in the industry. And one of the things that he did, he forced me to read essays of Warren Buffett for his class. And it took me 3 months, and I read it line by line. And I remembered at the time where each piece of information was in terms of page number. Mm-hmm. But I'm really happy that he did that. And one of the things that struck me when I read that book was in the early part, Buffett in one of the essays was talking about the fact that they prefer to deal mostly or only with people who they like, trust, and admire. And I think this embracing this mindset can be game changing. And the example you just provided illustrates that, in the sense that this non-professional investors saw in Buffett, in Missionary Buffett and Munger, people who they liked, trusted, and admired, and they basically invested with them and held on to it, and they were rewarded with that. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that, yes, there are many roads that lead to Rome, but at the end of the day, if you don't have patience, especially with lot of these long-term ideas, the outcome might not be as rewarding compared to people who do have patience.
The question is AI going to help us to be more patient and have more conviction, or undermine it? And I think it's a very personal experience.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to ask you about something that really stood out to me reading your book. You talk about the institutional memory advantage, and I think it's not talked about enough, but I think it's huge. And I personally write a lot. Obviously, I publish some of it. It's an essay form or a book, but I also write for my own benefit. I found something new about a company, I write it down, and it became a habit, a routine, because I know that I will not remember. I admire that you remembered by heart all the letters, but I know I forget. So it's a note to a future self. And the challenge I've had through most of my career was that, how do I retrieve what I know that I knew, but I don't know where it is? And I date these notes and with tickers and everything else. Now, AI, to me, is also a very disruptive force on that front, and I'm curious about your thoughts. I can go back and find what I wrote about the stock. I don't even have to ask the world, but what I said about it, and cross-reference with what I'm thinking today.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing some work still ongoing in terms of what's next and what's on the frontier in terms of next generation AI use cases and capabilities. And one of the things that I think we'll see more and more of in the next few years is ability not necessarily to apply Gen AI tools to call transcripts, filings, and things of that nature, which are public, but to private data, and at a deeper level to institutional memory of a company. And that's actually what the difference between larger fund and a smaller fund may manifest itself in the future. When I said a smaller fund may plateau at some point, because larger fund have a structured repository of interactions, emails between PM and analysts, documentation of investment memos, notes, channel checks, and so on and so forth. And at some point, they can apply LLM to those. Look at the last 15 years of institutional memory, both ad hoc interactions, but also reports and so on, and figure out what were the type of ideas that worked more than others. What were the inflection point in the restaurants that we invested in? What type of themes are winners and what are generally the ones which have less success? And then by incorporating that sort of thinking in the new idea generation process, they can potentially generate a stronger alpha. So that's one way. And then the second way it can impact is what you just described, and I fully agree with is that we humans tend to forget. It's a blessing, I think, in general. But for some of the pieces of wisdom that we read, or some of the learnings that we have, they might not remain top of mind for us. One way we can use AI is to remind us with those, and that can be through the use of agents or other means.
Very powerful, very powerful. And I think the bigger the firm, the more data there is. And I remember when people would go around the room and say, who looked at it last time and when was it? And now you can just ask and see the note and the date and the name and the reference. And I think that's very powerful. And then, a human can read it, but you know where it is and you know what you're looking for.
Exactly. And then I talk about this in some of my presentations as well. So far, Gen AI tools have been mostly focused on textual data, in the sense that they're trained on conference call transcripts, filings, press releases, and so on. The next frontier is train these models on voice and video. So, for example, think about a conference call where an analyst asks the CEO, just to confirm, you're not going to make any tuck-in acquisitions in Europe in the next 18 months. And the CEO says no. And second scenario, CEO says, no. So there is this sort of a signal value in there that if you look at the transcript, it might not be picked up, but an LLM using video and voice will pick those up. And then if you look at the firms like, let's say, Bridgewater, among others, and that's not necessarily a fundamental or value investing firm, but I'm using it just as an illustrative example. They record a lot of their meetings, and they have voice and video recordings available, so they can use that wealth of data in addition to more structured institutional memory they have to generate some of those learnings.
It's interesting that you mentioned, because I brought it up in a conversation or two even here, how I even pull up myself audio files and listen to a part of the recording of the earnings call because I want to hear how they said it. And I'll tell you that, I'm sure you have met enough CEOs and executives in your career and met them in person or over the phone or talked to them. It's very hard for humans to hide behind the voice. And I think that's why the podcasting is such a powerful medium, because people want the authentic voice. Like in written words, you can have somebody edit the words and they can sound as beautiful, sometimes too beautiful to be true. But in human voice, just a little nuance that you pointed out, I think we have a hard time lying to each other. Maybe some of us are really good at it. I have no doubt. But like an average CEO that grew for the company, took it over, is running a business and is making sure employees are happy, is making sure all the stakeholders are happy and the shareholders are happy. He or she is not a professionally trained actor. They might have become much better public speakers because they have to go out on stage and talk. But you can figure out and pinpoint and listen and hear a nuance in their words. And sometimes the honesty that comes through the voice, it's unbeatable. And it's not that they tell you, it's the nuance that tells you like this is the bottom for the margins, or this is as much as they can open in terms of stores per year. And you kind of feel like, I think you said something, but you actually meant something else, like with the no that you described. Anyways, it's a nuance, and we're looking for the human aspect of investing. I have a question or two left, but one that I don't want to forget about. You've been so immersed in this experience. You wrote a book about it. You host conferences about it. If you have an unpopular contrarian opinion that many experts would disagree with you, is there one, and what is it?
I alluded to this point earlier, in the sense that if you look at public media and what's being said by many executives today, they usually highlight the positive part of AI, saying that it allows investment teams or finance professionals to do more with less, and that's certainly true. But my perspective, which might not necessarily be fully contrarian, but it's a little bit more nuanced, is that while Gen AI certainly allows us to achieve that, it will also lead to that bifurcation of performance. So similar to many other technologies in the last few hundred years, there will be winners and losers, and because Gen AI is so fundamentally different compared to other financial technology innovations in the last 20, 30 years, like Bloomberg terminals or other type of alternative data, this bifurcation and separation of a better and worse performance will happen much faster. So I think that's my take in terms of the impacts. So the key takeaway is that action items on the table. Let's fix our investment process to the extent we can, and let's embrace the technology as much as we can.
Well put. One last question. How do you think about success?
Well, the definition of success for me is to be in a state of, for lack of a better word, tranquility and content in such a way that your values, your interests, and your priorities align with what you're doing. If that's the case, I think you have achieved success. So you probably noticed that I didn't define it in the sort of economics or financial form, because in my perspective, that doesn't necessarily embodies true form of success. So whatever, put it simply, if you're content and happy what you're doing, and what you're doing aligns with your values and interests, I think you have achieved success.
I like the sound of that. You have a painting behind you. It's a musical instrument for those watching, but for those listening. Is there music in your life?
Yes, I do like music, and I actually love art, and we do collect. That's not one of my pieces, but yeah, that's one of my guilty pleasures. I follow art and music scene closely.
I like that. Ehsan, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think it will open our eyes to seeing AI in a different way, embracing it, but also being aware of what it brings, and slowly pacing ourselves as much as we can, trying to figure out how to make it a part of our lives and our investment process in the best way possible. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder, if you want to supercharge your investment research like I have, check out Tenzing Memo. Don't forget to use code BILLIONS at sign up for your extended trial and 10% discount. It's been a game changer for my process, and I think you'll find the same. Thanks for listening to Talking Billions, and I'll see you next time. You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.